That sounds
All right.
welcome, everyone. It is March the 1st. Rabbit, rabbit, rabbit. Good luck to all of us for the month of March. So elated to see each and every one of you here tonight. My name's Sue Kuntz, and I am going to be y'all's MC for tonight. We are the San Antonio Storytellers Association, and we meet the very first Wednesday of each month and always welcome everyone, totally free. We are family oriented. Our stories are for everyone, and our songs and poems, whichever art you would like to share tonight, is always welcomed. We do meet for an hour, so we try to keep our stories under 8 minutes, if at all possible. And we've got a special treat tonight. We actually have a few folks, maybe more than a few, who are going to actually be involved with the Tejas Storytelling Festival, which is coming up next week. Hard to believe. So we'll put a little bit of that information in the chat, but as each person tells tonight, please go ahead and let them know how you are involved with the Tejas Storytelling Festival. We won't be recording any of it this year because it's live and we're excited. And if you cannot make it this year, please put us down for that second week in March, because we tend to always have our festival then, starting on a Thursday and ending on a Sunday. So we hope to see many of y'all there. So what we're going to do, we left off with Nathan Holliner last month, and we just ran over time, and Nathan was gracious enough to hold that story tight for a month. And so he is going to bring in the month of March with his story. So how about a hand for Nathan Holliner?
Yes, thank you. Thank you all. Now, this story I wanted to tell you may sound a bit familiar, but a few things have changed. Mitzi Muskrat was having her birthday party, and she was so excited. She had planned this party for weeks, but she could only invite 5 guests. She chose Roger Raccoon, Timothy Turtle, Lulu the Mockingbird, and Sonia the Beaver. But she only had 1 more guest to choose from. She couldn't decide who she wanted to be her 5th guest. Should she choose CJ the Frog, or should she choose Paxton the Alligator? CJ or Paxton? What's a woman to do? I'm going to invite Paxton. Paxton was the biggest, meanest, and rudest alligator in the whole swamp. And he really hated CJ, who was a very mischievous frog. He was a very clever frog too. And so CJ became those, because before long, CJ stopped by Mitzi's house, and Mitzi walked up to the front gate and said, CJ, I've decided that you are not invited to my birthday party. What? I said, you're not invited to my birthday party. What? And then CJ said, well, if I'm not invited, then who did you invite? I've invited Paxton to come to my birthday party. What? I said I've invited Paxton to come to my birthday party. What? I said you're inviting Paxton to your birthday party. Mitzi, don't you know that Paxton is nothing but my father's old riding horse? What? That's right, Paxton is nothing but my father's old riding horse. If you want to invite a riding horse to your birthday party, that's your business. And then CJ hopped back home. Well, About an hour or so later, Paxton arrived because the herd arrived first at Mitzi's house. Mitzi walked up to the front, out to her front gate and said, Paxton, I've decided I am not going to invite you to my birthday party after all because CJ told me something about you. What did CJ say? Paxton demanded. CJ told me that you're nothing but his father's old riding horse. What? CJ told me that you're nothing but his father's old riding horse. What? I'm no riding horse. I'm going to get CJ, and I'm going to bring him back here, and he's going to tell you the truth. CJ, he was angry. CJ, he was furious. CJ, he was enraged. He went running through the swamp towards Paxton, he was angry. Paxton, he was furious. Paxton, he was enraged. He went running through the swamp towards CJ's home. Now, CJ knew that Paxton would soon be coming, so he quickly pulled out an ice pack and sprinkled talcum powder all over him to make himself look pale, and then he climbed into bed to pretend that he was homesick. Well, and pretty soon, Paxton showed up at his front door, and he knocked on the front door, and he said, CJ, open the door. And who is it? CJ asked in a hoarse voice. It's me, Paxton, Paxton roared. All right, you come outside and come over to Mitzi's house. You told her that I was nothing but your father's old riding horse. Oh no, Paxton, I never said such a thing. I've been sick in bed all this time. Open the door. And Paxton whacked down the door with his thick, heavy tail. And he marched inside, and he looked all over the house. I know you're in here, CJ, Paxton growled, so come out. And then he walked over to CJ's bed, and he pulled the sheets off CJ, and he said, Paxton, you're coming with me right now. CJ, you're coming with me right now. Paxton, I'd like to go, but I'm just too sick to go. Paxton and CJ, you're still coming with me. No, Paxton, I'm just too sick. I would surely die if I got out of bed. No, see, now you can't fool me, CJ. You're coming with me right now. No, Paxton, I'm too weak to go. Even if you carried me, I surely die. And Paxton said, CJ, you're coming with me, whether you're sick or not, even if I have to carry you. Well, CJ, Paxton, maybe if you carry me, I can go. And so Paxton reached down and he picked up CJ in his arms. But CJ said, oh, Paxton, I can't go. You can't carry me like this. Carry me on your back. And so, okay, please get down on your hands and knees and let me sit on your back. Okay, I'm going to carry you on my back, Paxton said, but you're going to tell Mitzi the truth. Oh yes, I'll tell her the truth. Okay, and now Paxton be off. Paxton started off, but then CJ said, oh, Paxton, wait, and there's one more, I need something. I would surely fall off your back and die. I need something to sit on your back. So CJ went and got a blanket and he placed it on the top of Paxton's back. And then Paxton said, okay, I've got a blanket on my back. Now, can we go back to Mitzi's house? Oh yes, I'm ready to go. Okay, and then Paxton be off. But then CJ said, Paxton, wait, I need one more thing. I need something else. I'm going to fall off and die. Quick, Paxton, I need something else to sit on. I need something to place on your blanket. Okay, what is it now? Paxton asked. And then CJ said, I need a saddle to sit on. I need a saddle. So CJ went back to his tool shed and found a saddle, and he tied that around Paxton's back. And he said, okay, CJ, and now I'm all secure. And and Paxton said, okay, I've got a saddle and a blanket on my back, and you're going to tell Mitzi the truth. Oh, yes, I'll tell her the truth. And now we'll be gone. And now Paxton be gone. Paxton started off, but then CJ said, oh, Paxton, wait, there's one more thing, just one more thing. I need something to hang on to, or else I will surely fall off and die. Oh, okay, CJ. Hey, go get something to hang on to. But CJ, you promised to tell Mitzi the truth. Oh, yes, I'll tell her the truth. Then Paxton went outside again, and he brought back a bridle, and he slid that bridle right over Paxton's head and over his mouth. And then he held on the rings in his hands, and he climbed up on Paxton's back. And then CJ reached up and picked up a small stick and picked up a large stick. And Paxton asked, CJ, what's the stick for? Oh, Paxton, there are so many flies up here on your backside. I'm going to keep the flies away so they won't bother you. Okay, CJ, I've got a blanket and a saddle on my back, and I've got a bridle around my head, and I'm going to carry you on my back. But you're still going to tell Mitzi the truth. Oh, yes, I'll tell her the truth. And now now Paxton, be off. And at last they started off. Paxton waddling down the path, carrying CJ on his back. Now, meanwhile, Mitzi had all her friends. Meanwhile, Mitzi's guests had all arrived at her house, and their party had just started. They all sang and danced, played games, and ate cake and ice cream. But then, all of a sudden, they stopped short, and they looked down at what was coming up the path. When they all hurried over to the fence, and they saw CJ on the back of Paxton. And as soon as CJ saw all the guests staring at them, he raised his stick and he whipped Paxton on the side. And he whipped Paxton on the side, and he shouted, "Hi ho, Paxton, away!" And then Paxton galloped toward the house. Ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. And CJ pulled on the reins and said, "Whoa, boy!" And then he looked up and he said, "Hello, Mitzi. I told you Paxton was nothing but my father's old riding horse." And all the animals stared in a complete amusement. A frog riding on the back of an alligator. That's the silliest thing we've ever seen. And they all laughed at Paxton. And CJ hopped off of Paxton's back, and he took a bow in front of everyone. Well, Paxton was so embarrassed he made a beeline for the river, and he dove into the water, and he swam down deep, deep, deep. And he swam away. And ever since that day, alligators have crawled around on all four legs, and they stay deep in the water where no one would stare and laugh at them. And ever since that day, CJ is always, always very, very careful whenever Paxton is about. And if you ever hear him growl, well, you know what he's remembering. And that's my story.
Good job. All right. Thank you so much, Nathan. A pourquoi story. I love it. We love your story. What we really want you to do, Nathan, just because you are our future of storytelling, is try to keep your story down to 8 minutes. It ran over about 5 or 6 minutes, but it's a great story. Now you get to pick and choose what you want to really fit into the story to make that work. So excellent job. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Miss Kuntz.
All right. So our next teller, actually our next singer, She comes all the way from Oklahoma. We actually have two Oklahoma folks here tonight and so grateful. In fact, both of them are going to be in our Tejas, or sorry, I should say Texas Storytelling Festival. I'd like to introduce to you all, if you have not already met her, Fran Stallings. She's been around quite a while in the storytelling world, and we love it when she joins us. Take it away, Fran.
Thank you. I offered to do this because I was going to do this short song to introduce the second half of the scary stories on Thursday night at the festival in Denton. And then I had a separate story that I was going to do later in that half of the program, the scarier stories for adults. But the order of tellers and the length of their things changed around, and so Marianne asked if I would drop the song from the program and just do my story. Well, I'm glad that I'm going to have a chance to do the song anyway. And I wouldn't say it's not for children, except that it is pretty creepy. It comes from Australia, from a bush poet named John Mansfield. And it was set to music. And it goes like this. Lie still, my newly wedded wife, lie easy if you can. You're young and ill-accustomed yet to sleeping with a man. The snow lay deep and the moon was full as it shone on the cabin floor. His young wife rose without a word and ran barefooted out the door. Then up he got to follow her, and an angry man was he, but of his wife he saw no sight, just the moon that shone brightly. He followed her track both swift and sure, and he called aloud her name. But only the dingoes in the hills cried back to him again. The hair it stood upon his neck, and his angry mind was gone. For where her 2-foot track ran out, a 4-footed track ran on. Her gown it lay upon the snow, as it would upon a sheet. But the track that ran from where it lay was not made by human feet. He started into walking back, then he started in to run. His quarry turned all on her track and hunted him in turn. An empty bed still waits for him, though he lies in a crimson tide. Beware, beware, you trapper men, beware of a grisly bride.
I have never, ever heard that song. I love it. Very melodic, eerie. Oh, my word. Excellent, excellent.
We had planned that would introduce the second half of the creepy stories, but the time ran out. So I'll just do a short story later in the program.
That sounds good.
Well, so I'm glad I had a chance to share it, though.
Yes, and hold on to that. I mean, truly, during the Ghost Stories concert, you just never know. So hold on to it just in case. Oh my gosh, that was amazing. All right. Okay, so everyone has to, those of you who are going, make sure you show up Thursday night. It's actually a free concert. So the more the merrier. And you'll get to hear Fran along with the 7 other folks.
Oh, yeah, there are quite a few. The first half is the silly kind of scary, like the ghost with one black eye kind of story where kids are welcome to come and pretend to be scared. But then there will be an intermission, and if you keep the little ones in the second half, you're responsible for sitting up with them that night.
Okay, beware. It's true. And it's not going to be just that night. They'll have nightmares then for many nights to come. All right. Thank you so much, Fran. All right. Our next storyteller is actually one of our own. She's a SASA storytelling board member and, of course, a member of SASA, Susan Whipple. She's joining us tonight with one of her fantastic tales. How about a big hand for Susan?
Thank you. So glad to be here. Grandma and great-grandmother prepared 3 meals a day, every single day. There were no restaurants or takeout places in these ladies' lives. Maybe sometimes somebody in the family would have a big dinner for a holiday or a special occasion like birthdays. But even then, the women wouldn't come empty-handed. Every woman arrived with a great big platter or covered dish full of food to add to the meal. And it wasn't easy to feed the family or the holiday crowd. Country folks raised all their own food. But people in the city generally had to shop almost every single day. They all ate whatever was in season or whatever they could pickle or store or dry or can and have the rest of the year. But these stalwart women, they had tiny, tiny kitchens. They had ice boxes, no refrigerators for them. And they had very little counter space and even smaller cupboards. And they still did wonders with what they did. They cooked on coal stoves or wood-burning stoves. And if they wanted water, they had to pump it from the well. Hot water was another story. They'd have to pump the water and then heat it on the stove. But they cooked and they baked and they fried and they pickled and they did all that stuff and they baked. They baked bread, cakes and biscuits and cookies, and everything they made was delicious. Well, everybody's family has traditional dishes that everybody loves and they think back on with longing. My own grandmother was very famous for her chicken noodle soup, that is. She'd sort the soup off, and once it was bubbling, she'd make the dough for the noodles, and she'd roll it out real thin. And once it was rolled out thin, she'd form it into a little tube, and then with her special knife, she would take it and she'd snip, 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 until all of a sudden there was a great big pile of golden noodles, all the same size. And when it was time, she'd put it in the pot and they would cook, and it was wonderful. And it would the aroma just permeated the entire house. We loved it when we came to visit Grandma after she had been baking a bread or some kind of breads. And she would take it out of the oven, let it cool a little bit. It was still warm, and she'd slice off great big fat slabs of it, and we'd slather it with butter, and we'd have it with a glass of ice cold milk. But the best traditional thing that we had from Grandma was a coffee cake that she baked every Friday. She put in a whole bunch of white raisins that she had dredged with cinnamon and sugar. And she mixed it into the dough. But as it baked, it seemed like these raisins sort of got together in little bunches all over the place, so that when you cut it open for your slice, you'd have a little bunch of raisins here and there and the other. And if you looked at them, they looked like little baby birds in a nest. And we called it nest cake. And we eat it, and we'd pick out the little raisins. It was delicious. Even her cookies, that were very plain cookies, were very special to us, because she'd take the plain dough and she'd put on, again, cinnamon and sugar and bake them. And then she would pile them high in her cookie jar that was shaped like an old-fashioned lady with a hoop skirt and a babushka on her head. But how did Grandmother do it all? She didn't have a cookbook. She didn't have measuring cups or spoons. She didn't have a written recipe. She learned from her mother, who learned from her mother, so on back in time. These ladies knew exactly what to put in each dish. They learned the routine. They learned how much. They just put things in until it felt right. It had to feel right. And then they cooked it or baked it, and it was wonderful. I had a friend, his name was Richard, and he loved his grandmother's cooking. He would go visit her and he'd eat everything she had, and it was really nice. And when he grew up and became an adult, he realized that she didn't write anything down. None of her recipes were written down. And what was going to happen when she was no longer there? He began to worry about that. So one day he approached her and he suggested that they get together for a cooking and baking session and he would take notes. And she agreed. Well, the day finally arrived, and Richard appeared bright and early in the morning with his paper and his pencil, and he was ready to go. And this was the plan. Grandma would work on one recipe at a time, and she'd go very slowly, and as she added things into the bowls, Richard would be there with the measuring spoons and the measuring cups and whatever else he needed to get it all together. So they started out, and Grandma did it slowly, and it worked out for a while, and Richard would put the cup in front of her, and she'd put in the flour or whatever else it was, and he'd measure it, and then he'd write it down, and then at a certain point he would write down the steps that she was taking to do it, and it was doing fine. But Grandma got a little impatient, and she started speeding up a little bit and kind of elbowing Richard a little out of the way. It was very annoying to her. Well, he still hovered over her, and he still put the cups out and the spoons and all the rest of it, and it was getting a little frantic. And it got to the point where they started shouting at one another. But Richard wouldn't give up. He was determined, and he kept on sneaking it in, and Grandma kept on adding stuff without him looking, and it was terrible. And finally, she got to the point where she thought they were going to come to blows. So she took the bowl and the spoon, and she turned her back on him, and she kept on adding things quickly before he could even realize what they were, and then stirring it a little bit, and adding more, and stirring it some more. And he finally just stood there staring at us, her wondering what was going on with this plan. And finally, Grandma took the bowl and the spoon, and she handed it to Richard, who was standing there glaring at her. And she said, "Stir." Well, he took the bowl and the spoon. He didn't say anything, but he began to stir. And as he did, Grandma said, "That's how it should feel." The end.
Yes. Oh, I love that you brought us all back to our grandmother's cooking. And those of you who do not know this about Susan Whipple, she is a master baker herself. Not only that, she's just a fantastic cook, and she has her own cookbook and just wonderfully gave out that cookbook. I think it was at Christmas one year to the SASA members.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last thing you said.
So I believe you gave us your cookbook
I think
before COVID.
I think it was to the Leadership Council.
Yeah, okay. It was so wonderful. And of course, her cookies, her brownies, and probably that bird nest cake might be even in there. I need to look for it. Thank you so much, Susan. That was marvelous. And we can lead off on that right now to another Oklahoma storyteller, Chester Weems. Chester has a very short story, but he's also doing a workshop having to do with memoirs and working with what you know. So I'm going to let Chester tell a story and then maybe tell us a little bit about that workshop that he'll be in charge of at the Tejas I always say that wrong, at the Texas Storytelling Festival. Chester, you have the floor.
Okay, well, thank you. Uh, Actually, the workshop is entitled Collecting and Sharing Family Stories. And I'm going to be advocating that it'd be nice to collect Grandma and Aunt Edna's stories, you also ought to collect your own story. You know, and what the line I use is put genealogists out of work. You know, if you write your own stuff down and make it a whole lot easier for people to track down your family in the future. So that's what it's going to be about. It's going to be bits and pieces. I use photography a little bit to illustrate, to share stories with family and that sort of thing. So that's what it's going to be. About a 90-minute thing, although I don't know if I have 90 minutes worth of material or not, but we'll have a little fun, I hope. So that's kind of what it's going to be, Sue. I appreciate that. Appreciate the chance to. And I suspect with people not having been there in a while, I'll be surprised if it's not a pretty good size turnout for the festival. I certainly hope it is. And I noticed that the festival hotel is already sold out for everything, and they've listed a couple other hotel options. So it's a nice feeling. So anyway, come on down. And John said he's going to be telling a story, and of course Fran's going to be there, and so it'll be a lot of fun. It'll be a good deal. It'll be a lot of fun. And I have made so many friends over Zoom the last 3 years that I've never met. And so we're all going to be surprised at each other when we see each other. And, you know, it's like, I finally got to meet Brooks Myers this fall. I didn't know he was 7 feet tall. My gosh. Well, he's maybe not 7, but he sure looked tall to me. But anyway, that's kind of neat. I'm looking forward to that. So I hope that's enough sales pitch for you, Sue, but hey, it's pretty neat. Well, I told Sue if I could, I had a little thing I'd like to do tonight. It's not very good. I don't expect it to be very good. The other night, I was tossing and turning in bed, and this image kept coming into my head, and these words kept coming into my head. And so about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, I had to get up and write them. And even as I wrote them, they looked stupid. There's nothing about it. I don't understand what it is. And so I wrote them up, and the next day or so, I showed it to my wife and my daughter and a couple other people. And they just kind of looked at it and shook their heads too. So none of us know what this is about. And when I get through, you'll understand what I mean. It's not very good. We have no idea what it's about. It must be something deep in my psychology that's there's something weird going on here. So anyway, it's sort of a poem, except it doesn't rhyme. So anyway, it's called The Qualified Frog. I go to the door to see who is there. Standing at my door is a qualified frog. At least I think so. So I ask him, "Are you qualified?" "Yes," he said, "I am qualified. Some say I'm overqualified." "Well, how can I help you?" "Was my mail delivered here?" "It usually is delivered to the qualified pond. Perhaps it was delivered here in error." "No, I don't think so. Maybe it was misqualified." "I hope not," said the qualified frog. "It's not easy to get qualified, and to be misqualified is so hurtful, and not as bad as being disqualified." And so I have no idea what any of that means, but I got it out of my system, and I just feel better for it.
I think that is wonderful. I think you have a children's book on your hands. Just keep reading that out and talking it through and writing it down. I love the title, The Qualified Frog. Unqualified, disqualified. I love it. You did great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we've got Judy Turowski here from West Virginia. She is representing the arts right now, which we are just elated about. Every state needs advocates for the arts, and she is a huge advocate, and we are just so excited that she has joined SASA. She is now a SASA member. We only wish you could be down here. So at some point, we will definitely get you down here, Judy. But I know you have a tale to tell.
I do, and it's a West Virginia Tales. Thank you so much. This story comes from Max Samples, who was an excellent writer, musician, a former college administrator here in West Virginia. And it comes from his book, The Devil's Tea Tables, and Mac has given me permission to tell it. It's called the Wampus Cat of King Shoals. The Elk River flows into the Kanawha River here in Charleston. And many, many years ago, folks traveled up the Elk River Valley to find a good place to homestead, a good place to build a home. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Hewitt were one such couple. They traveled up the Elk until they came to a place where two creeks emptied into the Elk almost side by side. And the area between them and the Elk became a shoals. And it was called King Shoals. And Mr. Hewitt figured that the bottomland right above that shoal would make an excellent place to farm. So they settled there and he built them a cabin. And about a couple years later, Mrs. Hewitt had a baby boy. And a few years after that, she had another son. Well, those boys grew up smart and strong, and they were a great help to their father there on the farm. But it wasn't for another 10 years before Mrs. Hewitt had another baby. And this was a little girl. Now, Mr. Hewitt absolutely loved his sons, loved them dearly, but he just doted on this baby daughter. Many an evening, Mrs. Hewitt would be helping the boys get ready for bed, and Hewitt would sit in the rocking chair in front of the fire and rock his baby daughter. And he would talk to her, and he would sing to her, and he would tell her, "Oh, Papa's going to take such good care of you. Papa's not going to let anything bad happen to you." And when he smelled her sweet baby scent, he thought his heart would burst. Sadly, though, a few months later, the little girl fell ill, very ill. She was running a terribly high fever. And Mr. and Mrs. Hewitt tried everything they could to get that fever to break, but nothing worked. Finally, Hewitt decided that he would have to ride down to Charleston to find a doctor who would come up to their home to help their baby girl. They didn't have a saddle horse. He threw an old blanket over one of his draft horses and made his way down toward Charleston. It took him 3 days to reach the city. And then it took him another 3 days to find a doctor who would make the trip back up the Elk with him. And it took them 3 days. And when they got there, it was too late. The little girl was dead. The doctor examined her and said that it was probably scarlet fever that had killed her. And he told the Hewitts there wasn't anything he could have done. And when he left, he refused any payment from Mr. Hewitt because he said, "After all, I really didn't do anything." Well, the Hewitts buried the little girl up on the hill above the farm. But Mr. Hewitt was so grief-stricken, he took to his bed for days. He would not eat. He couldn't sleep. Unfortunately, the boys were old enough that they could keep the farm going until finally Hewitt was able to rouse himself to begin working again on the farm. A few nights later, he and his wife were standing out on their porch enjoying a nice warm evening when down off the hill, there came this terrible cry. It was a scream. Now, most folks in West Virginia would say that that was a panther. And it's true that a panther's scream could just chill your blood. But this scream, this cry, would send a cold blade of fear right into your soul. And Hewitt heard that scream. He knew what it was, but he dared not speak it. He and his wife then went to bed, and no sooner had their heads touched the pillow, but that scream came down off the hill again. This went on for several more nights, until finally Hewitt decided he'd go up on that hill and find and take care of whatever it was that was defiling his daughter's grave. One night, he whistled up his dogs and took his rifle and went up on the hill and sat down and waited. But nothing happened after several hours. So he called the dogs up and they went back down. Hewitt went to bed. He barely closed his eyes when there came that scream. The next night, he took the dogs back up the hill and took his rifle and settled in to wait. But this time, the dogs began barking and carrying on at the base of a tree that was nearby. They had treed something. They had caught something up in the tree. So Hewitt ran over with his rifle and looked up into the branches. He couldn't see anything clearly, but he could see movement. So he raised his rifle and fired. and the body of whatever it was came crashing down through the branches and fell to the ground. Hewitt picked up a leg. He couldn't see what it was, and he dragged it back down the hill to the smokehouse that was quite a distance from the barn. He lifted the body of what he had shot up on a table and lit a lantern. And then he saw it. It was the body of a panther, all right, but it had the face of a woman. Bile, sour and hot, rose in his throat, and he bent over and spat it on the ground. It was what he had feared. It was a wampus cat. Now, many folks in West Virginia believe that a wampus cat is the manifestation of a person who has died and who believes they had been wronged in death, and they return as a wampus cat to torment the person who wronged them. Hewitt wiped his mouth on his sleeve, and he took a rope, tied it around the hind legs of this creature, threw the other end up over the rafters, and hauled it to hang upside down there in the smokehouse. He would deal with it in the morning. Hewitt walked back up to the house, and the boys had heard the rifle, and they were out on the porch. Papa, Papa, we heard the gun. What did you get? Can we go see? Boys, just go back to bed. It'll keep till daylight. Hewitt went to bed and fell into a deep, deep sleep. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, he was awakened because every animal in the barn was screaming and carrying on. He jumped out of bed to the window, expecting to see that the barn was on fire. It was the smokehouse. But it was far enough away from the barn for that very reason. He realized there was no danger, so he went back to bed. The next morning, Hewitt went down to what was left of the smokehouse, just a few timbers and the stench of burned hair and flesh. He shoveled up what was left and threw it into the midden. And life there on the farm returned to as normal as it could. But you see, that wampus cat haunted Hewitt to the end of his days. It haunted him with the thought that he had not done enough to save his baby daughter, and she had come back to tell him so. The end.
Beautifully told. Got goosebumps. And what a good dad. I hope he just would not worry about the wampus cat. This is the first time truly I have heard of the wampus cat. We have our legends here in Texas also, but the wampus cat is new to me. Raise your hand if you guys have heard of the wampus cat. Yeah.
It's an Appalachian thing. And there's different interpretations for it, but this one in particular has the idea that it comes back to right or wrong.
Oh my gosh. Oh, such a tragic tale. Beautifully told. Thank you so much. All right. Our next storyteller is also on our SASA storytelling board. We call it our leadership council, and we're glad she's back. She's truly is on the board most of the time. So she was able to take a break, and now she's back on our leadership council, and we're excited for it. Jane McDaniel. And since it is March, you all, if you don't already know, she brings Ireland to us. And if she doesn't bring it to us, we can go to Ireland with her during the summer because she has a nice cottage in Ireland. I think it's the west coast of Ireland, I believe, right? And hopefully you guys will join her sometime and you can talk to her about it later because she does, what can I say? Can you rent out a room in the house? Yeah. So without further ado, I'll let Jane share her tale.
Thank you, Sue. Well, it is March, just the beginning, and we are all Irish around here. I was born in Limerick City, and south of Limerick City in County Limerick, there's an ancient land. It's near Lough Gur. Near there is a village called Knockany. It's the land of the Lady Anya, the kindly goddess. Her name originally meant brightness. This area, it dates back to the Bronze and the Neolithic times, and Lough Gur Beside it is the Grange stone circle. That's the biggest round stone circle in Ireland. I've stood there in the middle and felt a sense of richness in this place, both in the physical sense of the green life and in the emotional sense of layer upon layer of myth and history that's embedded there. Not far too is the fairy hill, Knockferia, and Sliabh Phelim, which is full of legends of the Sidhe. Sliabh Phelim is Mount Phelim, and the harps of Clew Ridges of the Galtee Mountains going over towards Tipperary, and Sliabh Naman, the fairy mountain, full of stories. Yeah. In Knockany village, I'm going to tell you that this is a very short story with a very long introduction, because just give an Irishman the stage. In Knockany village, it's a quiet little place, and you can hear a dog's bark guarding the gate to the old churchyard. That's the only sound that breaks the evening. A stillness there, and cows graze near the village in the ruins of a stone castle. Doors to the houses in the summer are open to catch the last rays of the warm sun. And open doors, when you look in, you can get a glimpse of a holy water font right inside the door in the shape of the Virgin Mary, where people dip their fingers in for the holy water to bless themselves or bless their house or bless their children or their family. And there's an oilcloth covering the kitchen table. This Knockany is deep Ireland. Anya was the goddess of brightness. She was the sun queen, which is strange because she's the goddess of the night, of the moonlight. And she was the bright one, the honey mouth, they called her, the wife of the sea god, child of the sun, wife of the great sky horse, Echidé. And she was merciless who don't respect her, and generous to those who serve her. Well, the King of Munster, all the entire part of the south of Ireland, that is Munster, their king was Alel Olón. Later, he got a different name, and Anya gave it to him. He waited one night with Farchas the Druid on the hill at Knockany, outside of Knockany, and he was waiting for the Sidhe, hoping to see some of their magic, because the year before he'd been out there on Samhain night, and this was Samhain night, and he had been out there on that night, and he'd fallen asleep while he was taking care of his horses. And he woke up to find that hill denuded of grass, and his horses bewildered and hungry. And he didn't want the Sidhe to take control of his land again. So he sat there on the hill. The moon rose. Was a cigarette-shaped boat which rode gently across the sky. There was a faint scent of hawthorn in the air. Hawthorn is summer in Ireland. Shadows were around the hill's rocks, and the two men, they waited. Maybe the Sidhe would come out. The moon reached its zenith, and then music filled the air. And music came from inside the hill where they were sitting. The scent of hawthorn grew stronger in the darkness, and the hill opened up. A great light came from within, and a herd of gold and silver cattle came out from inside the hill and began to crop on the hill. At first, the light from within the hill blinded Alel and the Druid, and then they saw coming out an old bearded man with a grave face and a young girl playing music on the timpan. She was beautiful. She had long golden hair, and light was around her head. Alel looked at the girl and suddenly was filled with desire for her. He wanted her. He grabbed her. She dropped her instrument. The old man tried to prevent him by pulling her away, and Druid Farchas killed the old man with his spear. He pierced the old man's heart. Alel was on fire. He raped the girl. He violated her, but she She broke from him and she cut off his ears. Standing over him as he lay on the ground moaning, she said, "Well may you moan. You who would not listen do not deserve ears. You are cursed for generations to come. You will lose your kingdom and your honor. You have lost it this night. You will never hear music again. Men will mock you and women will laugh at you. And you will never know rest or pleasure again." And Alil lay on the ground. From then he was called Alil of the bald ears. And he grabbed his spear and tried to drive it through the girl's heart, but he was too feeble. She laughed. She laughed at him. She drew herself up to the full height. A woman mature, said, "Anya, you cannot stop me from rising every morning. I arise new made every morning from my bed in the sea king's kingdom. Although I seem to weaken with winter, I rise from my earth cradle like the yellow corn every summer." And behind her, the sky lightened. First birds began to sing. The lady was pale, face cold as November ice. But light flowed for her and encircled her head in a nimbus of gold. Anya, goddess of the green hill and the sun's brightness. And that's my story. That's an old one, a very old one.
That's a serious tale, beautifully told. Thank you so much. So when you say that's an old one, where could we find something like that?
Oh my goodness. There's a list of stories which was put out by the Irish government in sometime the 50s. They gave the job to children in schools to go around and listen to their grandparents to collect stories. And then there were various people. There was a couple of Englishmen at the in the middle of the 19th century that collected stories. And I know it's from one of those. I've forgotten his name. It dropped right at the moment. Later on, during the Celtic Renaissance in the 1920s, William Butler Yeats and Lady Gregory, who were the founders of the Abbey Theatre in Dublin and well-known writers and collectors of stories, they collected the stories, and I'm sure it can be found in amongst there. But those stories are very hard to tell because they're written in the vernacular of the people that they listen to.
Yes.
So I'm having quite a job rewriting those stories.
Yeah, it was excellent. Thank you for doing that for us. It's beautiful. All right, we're going to close out tonight with yet another star for the Texas Storytelling Festival. John Hale is our rising star from San Antonio Storytellers. Yes, we're very excited. So he will be there. Well, he'll be there Friday and Saturday, but I believe the Rising Star concert is on Friday. And many of us will be there rooting you on, John. So without further ado, please share your story.
So at the end of the day, my brothers and I would listen, and we'd look to the west, waiting. Then all of a sudden we think we see a cloud of dust and that something coming this way. And then we strain to hear, and sure enough, you hear the whistling and the whirling and the grinding of the dad's little economy truck bouncing down the dirt road towards the farm. And when he pulls into front of the house, he doesn't stop. Keeps on going right past the other gate into the back pasture. And now he's got dogs and kids running after him to see what kind of amazing things he has collected and has in the back of his truck. Now we have two pastures. And one pasture was the cows, the sheep, and the chickens. But the first pasture was all kinds of wonderful oddities that my dad would find. He worked in the city, and there always seemed to be a business or a manufacturing plant that was closing. And just out in the front, they just started putting all kinds of interesting things. And he collected these things, put them in the back of his truck, and brought them home. So in the back of that pasture, he pulled into a spot between where there were sheets of styrofoam that were 10 feet long and 6 feet tall. And there was padded foam that was 4 or 5 inches deep, size of a bed that we would love to jump on, like it was a bed that we could play on. And then there was metal shelving and metal boxes. They're just, you could make all kinds of things out of. But the best thing was this pallet pile that was 30 feet high and just expanded in the corner. So many pallets. Now, my brothers and I, we used some of these things without my dad's knowledge to make our own amusement rides and toys and fun go-karts. We attached to a lumber cart, you know, the ones that have the wheels that are not 4 parallel to each other, but 2 one in the front, 1 in the back, 1 to the left, 1 to the right. And it would kind of wobble a little bit so you could move big old pieces of 2x4s or sheetrock or plywood. Well, we would attach a large sail on top of that using another steel pole. And then we'd hold on to that sail with a rope. And we could get that cart in high gusty winds to carry us shooting across that backside of the pasture. And we'd have so much fun. Well, this day, my dad brought home all kinds of interesting things. There was these giant fiberglass balls that were like 5 feet circular. And then there was some conveyor roller pieces that were also kind of wedged in there. And so he left the truck there, and we went in and ate dinner. But after dinner, we unloaded and we kind of found some places for it. Now, my dad, he was a funny man. He had a big mustache and a light beard, and he was an engineer, a handyman, and an inventor. And he had his own metal shop in the back that was actually the bottom of the hay barn. And he had torches. He had welding machines. He had anything you needed to fix up something. And the neighbors always knew that they would come over to my dad's place if they needed something fixed, if they had a problem, and they'd ask my dad, how can I fix this? I just got this rack to go on the back of the bed of my truck, but it doesn't quite fit right because I think it was off a different model, but can you help me? And my dad, sure enough, he could go in the back of the pasture somewhere between all of this material, right there between the steel pipes and the large angle iron, and find just the right pieces with a little bit of welding and some cutting, make just the right bracket and help the neighbor to bolt that onto the back of his truck. And now it fit. And whenever somebody in town moved, maybe there was a divorce, maybe their children were moving off, my dad and his sons would show up, and my dad had made a 24-foot trailer that he welded up off an old mobile home. So this thing could carry a whole house load of stuff in one trip. And all the neighbors would show up, and we'd all pack up all their boxes and their furniture and all those things on this trailer. And it was problem solved. They were able to move off to the city. That is, until it was my dad who had decided to move out of the country across to another state. And when he had asked neighbors, they all had a reason they could not be there on Saturday to help load up the trailer. Half of my dad's sons had already moved on and were in other places. So my dad and just a few people moved what should have taken just a few hours. It took 3 days to load up that trailer. And my dad was pretty ornery about that. He was frustrated and mad. But he took his load he moved to Idaho. He had a new mom, new stepmom for me, a new wife. And with that, she had 6 adult children with their families that lived right there in Manan, Idaho. It was all family right there close by. And the fun thing was, many of them also had pastures full of stuff, of marvelous oddities. They had torches, they had welding machines, they had metal saws. And my dad finally found a supportive, wonderful community in Manan, Idaho.
Bravo. Oh, how much fun. Thank you so much for taking us to both of those places. How much fun, and what a great dad. And it sounds like you must have an imagination out of this world because of your childhood. That is amazing. Thank you so much, John. We are looking forward to seeing you and all of you who are part of the Texas Storytelling Festival next week. And those of you who aren't going, put it on your calendar for next year. Should be a lot of fun. And of course, in the meantime, we will meet the first Wednesday of next month, which is April, and we hope everyone will join us. Bring your friends and your family. We'd love to hear your stories, songs, poems. It all is welcomed here. So thank you all so much. You can unmute